The ranch was supposed to be a solution, a place where noise faded, pressure softened, and life finally slowed down. It represented distance from headlines, from expectations, from everything that had followed Gwen Stefani for decades. But at some point, something changed. The routines continued, the property remained active, life there went on exactly as expected. One thing didn't. Gwen wasn't there. There was no announcement, no explanation, no moment anyone could point to and say, that's when it happened. There was only absence. And in a relationship that had taught the public to read silence as stability, that absence landed differently. It shifted attention away from the ranch itself and toward the reason she stepped back from it. And that's where the story really begins. For a long time, the ranch was treated as more than a location. It became a symbol. To fans, it represented recovery, control, and balance after years of constant exposure. Open land replaced red carpets. Predictable routines replaced chaotic schedules. Public appearances slowed, headlines faded, and that quiet was interpreted as intentional. The absence of drama was read as proof that everything was finally steady. As months turned into years, that interpretation solidified. The ranch came to represent permanence, not just a home, but a direction. Reduced visibility was seen as commitment. Silence became confirmation. The longer things stayed quiet, the more people assumed the relationship had settled into something durable and unshakable. But stability can quietly turn into expectation when a place is asked to carry meaning it was never meant to hold. What begins as grounding can slowly become defining. Without anyone explicitly saying it, the ranch started to represent a fixed version of life, one where movement slowed, priorities narrowed, change became optional instead of necessary. That kind of life can feel reassuring to one person and restrictive to another. And over time, what once felt protective can start to feel like a boundary shaped by assumption rather than agreement. From the beginning, the difference wasn't about affection, it was about orientation. Gwen Stefani built her entire career around evolution. Each phase of her life involved reinvention, new sounds, new visuals, new creative directions. Change wasn't disruption, it was the mechanism that kept her grounded. Momentum was how continuity was maintained. Blake Shelton's sense of home worked differently. Familiar surroundings, long-standing routines, and physical land provided clarity and order. Stability wasn't something to escape from, it was something to preserve. The ranch wasn't a retreat from reality, it was a concentrated version of it, shaped around consistency and reliability. At first, those two perspectives balanced each other. Motion met stillness, expansion met grounding. Each offered something the other didn't emphasize. But balance only works when both people are still moving toward the same future. Over time, growth can be interpreted as restlessness. Stability can be experienced as limitation. Without blame or conflict, two definitions of home can slowly stop pointing in the same direction. That shift didn't arrive dramatically. There was no public fallout, no visible argument. It happened quietly, through adjustment rather than confrontation. One person leaned further into predictability, the other continued reaching for progression. Neither direction was wrong, but the distance between them became harder to ignore. Emotional needs rarely change with clear markers. They evolve quietly. What once felt supportive can begin to feel heavy. What once felt grounding can start to feel confining. When these changes aren't named, people handle them privately. Compromises are made without discussion. Expectations are inferred instead of clarified. Over time, that silence creates tension that exists beneath normal routines. Externally, everything still looked intact. Internally, alignment became uncertain.
This kind of distance doesn't come from conflict, it comes from restraint, from choosing not to press an issue because it feels easier to carry it alone. And eventually, what goes unsaid begins shaping priorities, choices, and direction. Fans noticed before headlines did, not through announcements, but through patterns, missed appearances, separate schedules, time apart becoming more frequent. Individually, none of it meant anything. Together, it suggested change. In high-profile relationships, absence is rarely invisible. When expected routines shift, people pay attention. As People and other outlets noted, much of the speculation didn't come from statements, but observation. Silence remained consistent, and in that silence, patterns carried meaning. The story formed not because new information appeared, but because old rhythms no longer matched. Online discussion followed carefully, not accusations, not scandal. Most theories centered on lifestyle differences, creative momentum on one side, preference for quiet continuity on the other. The tone remained cautious, language reflected uncertainty. Nothing was presented as fact, but silence allowed interpretation to grow without interruption. For Gwen, reinvention had always been essential. Each stage of her career responded to forward motion. Stillness wasn't restorative forever. At some point, it became disconnecting. Reports suggested she began feeling creatively removed while at the ranch, not unhappy, not trapped, just distant from the momentum that had always informed her sense of purpose. For Blake, the same environment offered fulfillment. The ranch wasn't a pause, it was completion. What one experienced as delay, the other experienced as arrival. That difference didn't surface as disagreement, it appeared as divergence. One orientation turned outward toward change, the other leaned deeper into what already felt sufficient. A refuge works when its meaning is shared. When that meaning changes, stepping away isn't rejection. Sometimes it's recognition that the refuge has already served its purpose. Publicly, little seemed different. Smiles remained, appearances continued. But public composure reflects presentation, not alignment. As InStyle and others observed, even routine photos were interpreted as responses to speculation. Images became symbols because explanation was absent. Privately, uncertainty can exist long before it's visible. Silence doesn't stop attention, it redirects it. And maintaining calm while managing misalignment requires energy. Over time, that imbalance becomes exhausting. There was no single breaking moment, no defining argument. The shift unfolded through accumulation, conversations postponed, feelings managed privately. Burnout arrived as control, not collapse. Misalignment didn't need conflict to grow. It only needed expectations to remain unspoken long enough. Eventually, the effort required to maintain equilibrium outweighed the comfort the relationship provided, not because love disappeared, but because sustaining the pattern demanded more emotional energy than could be supplied. That realization didn't announce itself as an ending, it appeared as awareness. When Gwen stepped away from the ranch, it was immediately interpreted as stepping away from the relationship. The ranch had become symbolic evidence of commitment. Leaving it was read as rejection. What that framing missed was the difference between leaving a place and leaving a person. The ranch had come to represent two incompatible futures, one centered on stillness and repetition, the other on motion and reinvention. Leaving the ranch wasn't necessarily abandonment, it was clarity, acknowledging that the environment no longer held the same meaning for both people. This story isn't really about geography, it's about alignment, about how love can exist alongside different needs. Stability and evolution aren't flaws, they're legitimate requirements. Conflict emerges when the balance between them shifts without being recognized. There's no villain here, no dramatic failure, just two people defining fulfillment differently. Leaving wasn't selfishness, it was honesty. And sometimes stepping back isn't about giving up, It's about preserving what remains true. Some relationships adapt by changing shape. Others reach a point where what once supported both no longer fits the same way, not because it failed, but because the people inside it evolved. The ranch didn't cause the distance, it revealed it, and in doing so, it turned a quiet absence into a story about growth, clarity, and the cost of staying somewhere that no longer feels like home. If you're drawn to calm, measured stories that look beyond headlines and focus on what's happening underneath, you may want to stay for what comes next.